In 1968, just a little over 2 decades after India became independent, a juggernaut rolled from Bombay to Kota in Rajasthan on a 6 week journey carrying a 70-ton heart of a Canadian nuclear reactor. Its objective was to bring electricity to a chronically energy starved nation and, by implication, water to a perpetually parched land. The transportation of this giant, cylinder like structure, made of 4-inch thick steel, was quite an exercise in an India with its legacy narrow roads, made even more challenging by the traditional Rajasthani structures and gates. Roads had to be lowered, balconies broken, and trees cut to accommodate the behemoth of a truck that was also shipped in from Canada. The story of the Canadian nuclear reactor arriving in India is a fascinating one, and chronicling the last miles of its journey is equally compelling as captured in the 1968 documentary titled Juggernaut. It was produced by the National Film Board of Canada.
2 more days pass, and Anu Shakti, the atomic juggernaut, is delivered to a land with 1,600 dialects, many millions of gods, precious little water, and a desperate need for power.
Juggernaut offers some remarkable sights and sounds of a nation emerging from subjugation, with some stunning juxtapositions of a cutting edge technology amid an ancient land. Mayank reports spoke to Paul Salzman, one of the crew members of the film unit who was in charge of its sound. Salzman did an extraordinary job of capturing ambient sounds that tell the story without much narration. Mayank report spoke to Paul Salzman, a well known Canadian filmmaker and president of Sunrise Films Limited, who, as a 23-year-old, worked as a sound engineer on Juggernaut. He has vivid memories of the whole enterprise of transporting the giant heart of a nuclear reactor. A 70-ton heart of a nuclear reactor being transported in 1968, uh, India of 1968, when it was barely 20 years old as an independent nation. It's a fascinating story. What do you remember of that, the transportation that happened?
Oh, I remember a lot of it.
Okay.
I remember the it being offloaded from the ship onto the truck, and we were there filming, and this huge stainless steel container, which I believe was 4 inches thick, of stainless steel. And then, starting out, and we had to go very, very slowly. Even in the urban areas where there wasn't a problem with the roads, we still had to move at, I don't remember, 3, 4, 5, 6 miles an hour. I'm sure we never went over 10 miles an hour. And then as we went through the villages, and as you saw in the film, they had to lower roads and raise bridges and break some balconies on houses that were too close to the road. And then, as you saw, we moved at 1 mile an hour at times, and then we had to stop and disentangle from a tree branch that had gotten caught, and so on. And people, of course, were like, this was like, people would run out and watch if it was in New York or Toronto even today, because it's such an unusual, crazy sight. So people, absolutely would come to the roadside all the time and just look at this thing going by. most of them probably puzzled because they didn't know what it is, or maybe they did, maybe the word passed along. What I remember is that and then we as the film crew, we would break off and go to a local village to get some scenes of the ambiance and the countryside it was going through. And of course, we were also getting scenes like when you see the water being drawn from the well by the bullocks. And why were we filming that? Well, because the Calandria was going to be the center of India's first nuclear reactor. And what that would do is it would bring electricity to millions and millions of people. And what would that do? It would mean that they could draw water from wells with pumps instead of the slow, laborious.
Right.
So we wanted to film scenes like that. So we would go off and then come back and join.
Yeah.
And I formed my most enjoyable bonds with 2 or 3 of the young engineers. The guys, I mean, I was 23 / turning 24, just turned 24. Yeah, I was just turned 24 when the filming started. And they were probably in their late 20s or earlier mid 30s. And I can see them in my mind, 2 or 3 engineers. And we would talk all the time. And one of the main topics of conversation was, so how do arranged marriages work? And why do you think arranged marriages are better or as good as what's called love marriages? And I learned a lot and had a whole new, because I knew nothing about arranged marriage, being a 24-year-old kid from Toronto. It was unheard of to me.
Right.
And it made no sense to me. However, as we talked about it, they said things like, well, whether you have fallen in love or just meet and the families and you hope that it can work out, either way, you have to work at the relationship.
Right.
So probably you're no worse off with an arranged marriage than you are with, quote, a love marriage. And both have major pitfalls.
Right.
Both, I mean, chauvinism and the patriarchy, and we're still dealing with that today in human relations in a big way.
Right.
But they were my closest relationship, other than our cinematographer, P.R.A. Shiv Puri, who was a lovely fellow. I think I looked him up recently. I think he's still living. I can't remember, but he was dear. I think we kept in touch for a few years, but then life takes you in whatever direction. And the director, Eugene Boyko, that he gave me the opportunity to work on the film was a miracle, as you saw in my film, the story of how I got the job by lying through my teeth.
I sorry, I must tell you, the way you have captured the ambient sound, the location sound, is extraordinary. I mean, I wouldn't have suspected that was coming from someone who had no clue about sound.
Well, it's interesting you say that. I'll give you a little bit of a. So I would, I was passionate. I was out of my depth, so I paid extra attention. And I would run out in the field, and so I could get the perspective of the truck from 10 feet away, from 20, from 30, from 50, from 100, from 2. I'd be running out there recording sound and then running back so that it didn't leave me behind. We only had one sync sound scene when we're filming the drummers, and the Calandria is moving in the background. That was a sync sound, meaning the sound had to be synced up. It wasn't Paul running off on his own or standing there recording what we call wild sound that would then be edited into place by the sound editors. So the one sync sound scene, I don't know what went wrong. Those were the days when you didn't have a wireless crystal connection between the tape recorder and the camera. That was going to come within a few years. But in those days, in '68, you had your Nagra tape recorder and you had to plug it into your camera when you were doing sync sound. I don't know what went wrong, but the sound was out of sync. And it wasn't too bad because the sound editors could put it in sync quite easily because you see the stick hit the drum. You see you have something you can boom,
Yeah.
so you could edit it.
Right.
But that was the one thing, like, I messed that up. To this day I don't know quite
I
why
see.
it. Yeah.
I see. In terms of the total time you took to go from Bombay to Kota, uh, it was several weeks, I think, right?
It was 6 weeks.
6 weeks.
Because remember how slow we were moving.
Yeah, right. And did you travel on the truck or you were in a different vehicle?
We had what the National Film Board did for reliability in terms of what they needed is they outfitted an Econoline van, a Ford Econoline van, and they outfitted it with an air conditioner on the top because it wasn't air conditioned.
Yeah.
And in those years, probably Ford Econoline vans weren't made air conditioned. I don't know, but so we had a unit on the roof that was probably 12 or 18 inches by 12 inches by 3 feet across, and on the roof of that. And so that was shipped on the ship with the big trucks, which had to be there before the Calandria arrived, of course. So we had our own vehicle, and we were in the convoy, and that's how we could drive off to villages or whatever we were doing, so we could get the ambient scenes.
Right. And the truck came from Canada, right? Because it was a special truck.
It was a special truck. I can't remember exactly. I have a feeling the trucks came from Vancouver, but I'm not sure why I think that.
But I was struck by the fact that at least in a few scenes, the driver was Indian.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they were trained to drive a vehicle of that size because I'm sure they were not used to that.
Well, they weren't used to it in the sense that those trucks were highly unusual anyway.
Right.
But also, there's so much trucking in industry for years and years and years and years, and transportation in India predates Canada by about 5,000 or 10,000 years.
That's true.
Your culture is very much older.
Yeah.
So yes, I mean, that wasn't hard to do. I don't know the process of getting the drivers, but they obviously were highly experienced truck drivers.
Another thing that stands out for me while watching the documentary is extraordinary juxtapositions of an equipment, modern equipment going through a country which still has a great deal of rustic rural life. People are dressed still in the 60s or 40s or 50s style. You barely see anyone in trousers and shirts. I think mainly because you were traveling through Rajasthan and Gujarat, which had those attire. I mean, I'm sure you mentioned the cameraman. Who decided to focus on visuals like that? Because it really lifts up the documentary.
Yeah, that was Eugene Boyko, the director, and I'm sure the cameraman Pierre made his suggestions and got shots of his own. It's at least the best relationship between a cinematographer and a director is a real interchange of inspiration and ideas. So I would say mainly the director, but also the cinematographer.
And since there is not a great deal of voiceover or commentary in it, I think the way you captured sounds really tell a great deal of the story of the documentary. Were you consciously doing it, or like you said, you were just winging it at that point?
Well, I was consciously getting everything I could. I didn't know what they would use and what they would not use in the sound editing, but I knew that I had to give them everything to choose from. So I was making sure that I was fastidious and paying attention to detail and getting everything that I thought they could possibly use. And they used it beautifully. And you're right, it adds a dimension to the film. But something very interesting about filmmaking. About 10 years ago, I was shooting a feature-length documentary. And my cinematographer in Canada and the States, and my cinematographer, who was a brilliant and sought after cinematographer, he said something very interesting to me, because in the world of film, or at least it used to be that way, I don't know, it depends on individuals, but it used to be thought, well, the producer's the most important because they bring it together, the director's the visionary, and second most important is the cinematographer, and sound comes somewhere down the pecking order.
Right.
And that I've experienced that in my filmmaking life. That's not how I treat it, but it's how I have been treated, or I've seen it treated. And the cinematographer of excellence said to me something very interesting that kind of really shocked me, because as a leading cinematographer, it was an unusual attitude. He said, in some way, sound is more important than picture.
Exactly.
And I said, how do you mean? He said, well, if you're in there watching a movie and there are scenes that are out of focus, in fact, you could shoot a whole film out of focus. It would be a particular look. It would be a particular thing. He said, but people won't get up and leave. But if you can't hear the sound okay, they will get up and leave. Isn't that interesting?
It is extraordinary. And I think he makes a perfectly valid point.
And I had never thought of it. It opened my brain. It opened my...
Yeah. When did you last see the documentary yourself?
Oh, maybe 6 months ago. I don't know why. I just wanted to see it and just be reminded of it.
I see. What was the reaction? Was it shown in India during those years, or?
As far as I know, it was, but I had moved on to other things, and I didn't really hear about it. I had also moved on from the film board and started doing other work, so I wasn't hanging with the same people. So I'm sure it was. I'm sure there were official screenings.
Okay.
I don't know whether it ever got into cinemas in India. I hope it did.
No, I doubt it seriously. I checked. I don't think it was. Maybe it would have been shown as part of a sort of a run-up to a feature film. But 26 minutes is a long time before any feature film, because feature films in India, are about 2.5, 3 hours.
Right.
So, but I would strongly recommend that this documentary is shown. That's why I want to do this story, because it's a remarkable telling of history of a certain kind, a country just getting independence and suddenly acquiring this huge technology from Canada. And like I said, the contrast between that technology and the country that it goes through is so visually striking.
It is. It's terrific. It's it's one of those films that, and there are many films like this. People work really hard and they put all their skills into it, and it's seen for a half an hour. It's seen for a blip in time, and it's gone.
Right.
It's nice that it's wonderful that it's on the National Film Board of Canada website. That's terrific. I was delighted to see that. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it ever played Indian film festivals, but you'd think if you submitted it now, not for competition because it's an old film, but I think it would play really well to Indian audiences, or to audiences in general, because of what you're saying about that meeting of the leading edge science with the antiquity of the culture.
Absolutely. In fact, next year marks the 55th anniversary of the film. I mean, not that there is anything special about 55, but it's an interesting landmark. So one of the things that I was going to suggest in my story is that perhaps India should consider showing it more widely as part of that.
I think that's terrific.
Yeah.
You're encouraging me the next time I go to India. I think because we've talked about this. My hobby, hobby, is to lead small tour groups to India, to share my love of India, to share my joy of India, and it's partly connected to the Beatles because of my work with the Beatles in the Maharishi's ashram in '68. Right after that is when I went to the ashram.
Yeah.
But I on those trips, I show a half-hour documentary I made on Minakari jewelry craft work in Jaipur, because we then go to the family on our trip. So in my film, made in 1977, you see the 11-year-old Gopal being taught this traditional craft being passed down generation to generation. And then we go to, and there's Gopal, and they meet him, and he's 58 years old now, and they see the family work. And we also can buy some jewelry if people want a little bit at wholesale,
Right.
and we have tea and so on. But you're encouraging me by this to take a DVD of Juggernaut and show that to the tour group as well as
I think you should. I think it's a remarkable chronicle,
yeah,
and I cannot say this enough. The role of the sound is extraordinary, because that's what, apart from the visuals, the sound really tells the story. There is a scene in it where there are these Rajasthani village people are hacking entrails, and suddenly you see vultures coming and taking some of the entrails. Even that sound is very well captured.
yeah, yeah.
Yes, so I think it's a story that needs to be told. I'm quite excited by it. That's why I announced it on my Facebook page too.
Well, that's lovely. I mean, you're bringing it alive for me again, 50,
Yeah,
almost 55 years later.
right.
In fact, what I'm thinking is on the next trip to India, I'll get in touch with the Canadian High Commissioner and see if he or she wants to do a little screening reception in the embassy.
Absolutely, you should do it. And for whatever it's worth, if you need any sort of media help, I'll pass on some contacts to you so that journalists can come and watch it, because they have no clue. I'm sure after I've done it, some of them may watch it. It's free to watch. So I was quite excited when I saw. I didn't think I would find the documentary in its entirety, but it's there.
Right, right. Well,
Yeah,
that's great. No, I'm delighted that you're seeing in it the
yeah.
depth and value, and that you're excited because now you're bringing it alive again for me.
Thank you.